Why did you put the book together? Did you feel that there was a demand for it, or was it just
basically,
for the love of it? Or
I'd left BW a long time. In fact, I'd left French Gold Abbott. I was at College Dickinson Pierce when it first occurred to me, the idea of doing the book. And then I had lunch with David Abbott. The Beatles had gone out of production, was just going out of production. And I said to David, look, nobody's done a book with all the ads in, and the Beatles are going out of production now, so it seems terrible that nothing's ever been done. I think I might try and do something. What do you think? Would you give me a hand? And he said, yes, of course I will. I said, it's just that your name will open the doors in America in a way that mine won't, and I'd like to do it. So I set off, and I kept David informed every step of the way, as it were. We wrote for permissions to different places and got them all. Then we put a lot of the ads together. Around this time we were doing it, a book came out in Sweden by a very nice copywriter who put together, a guy called Henry Holmgren. And so I phoned Henry up, tracked him down and said, look, I'm trying to do a very similar thing, a hardback that would be sold. I said his book was a kind of self-published thing. And I said, I want to put some storyboards into the commercials and things like that. And he said, oh, well, I'd be very happy to help. I can't remember. I think he came over here for some other reason, or I went over there. And he got a whole load of the ads that he'd collected, and these 2 or 3 collectors in Scandinavia had, and he got them all for me so that we could get them photographed and everything for the book. And he was a great help, actually, Henry. Very nice man. And we've over the course of a year or two, we put the book together. And then we got Edward Booth Clibborn, who had been involved with the NAD. He obviously knew how important the campaign was. He was happy to publish it. So he did the first 2 editions. It sold out. Well, there was obviously a market for it, and it sold out, and then we republished it a few years later. And then we've done four editions, so we're about to do the 5th. And this last edition sold out quicker than any of the others because of the whole Mad Men thing. And
you had a great promotional sticker on it.
Yeah.
Bernbach was Jewish, Koenig, Levinson, Krohn was German, but ethnic too. Mm-hmm. Would the campaign have been the campaign it was had they been WASPs?
No, it wouldn't. But there wouldn't have been a Dordain Bernbach, would there? I mean, you had a period of time where the agency world was dominated by WASP agencies. It was very hard to get a job in any agency, really, if you were of an ethnic background. The only place that did hire people, pretty much, was Gray's. There were a few other smaller places, like Weintraub, but a lot of them were agencies that did clothing accounts only, and things like that, that were Jewish in background.
Exactly.
And it was when Bill started Dordain, I think that also encouraged a few other people to take the step. What happened was there was a youth quake, as the famous woman Vreeland, Vogue editor, called it. There was that many young people in America who had been to college, they had money in their pockets, they didn't want all that old school sort of lecturing type advertising. They had a slight renegade instinct, blue jeans, rock and roll, that kind of thing was in the air. And all of a sudden they had this immense spending power. And the WASP agencies, the Harvard and Yale types, they had nothing in common. They couldn't really decipher, the needs of this kind of group. And I think that was one of the things that opened the way for the ethnics, because all of a sudden it was the streetwise that knew how to communicate and get things over and capture people's imagination, not the bookwise. And I think that's why that whole ethnic thing took off. It was part of that change in the structure of American society.
How important was New York, the city New York, for this kind of advertising?
I think initially there were only 2 places where it happened, and that was New York and San Francisco. And in San Francisco it was happening solely because of one person, Gossage. There was no great movement around him in San Francisco. He was just a renegade out there on his own doing his own thing. But I guess the same thing started him off, cultural change around him, being smart, streetwise, capturing people's imagination in a way that hadn't been captured before with advertising. So he was doing a similar sort of thing, and very much a child of the same generation. But other than that, it was New York, I think. And it was like a pebble in a pond, you know, it rippled out from there. And then other like-minded souls in other cities, you know. Fortunately, a lot of the advertising was going in things like New Yorker, which were distributed across America, a lot of the door-lane advertising. And, you know, that arrives in Seattle, or it arrives in all these other, Portland or whatever, and I'm sure, you know, people looked at it and thought, geez, this is what we should be doing, you know. And I'm sure it spread out a little like that. That's certainly what happened in this country. I mean, Alan Parker, of all people, who was a copywriter at College Dickinson Pierce, the other day I was at a talk he was doing. He said,
I thought he was an art director. He
No,
was
no,
a
he was a
copywriter.
copywriter, yeah.
I didn't know.
Yeah. He was talking and he said, I used to go down to Soho and buy the New Yorker. I never read any articles. He said, I just bought it to look at the Dordain ads that were in the magazine. So, you know, and lots of people did that. Those ads that appeared in the New Yorker, they went around the world causing a little ripple. Incredible, really.
It's funny, when you of course remember Paul Rand and Bernbeck working together.
Yes, indeed.
And back then
the first creative team, perhaps. The first
Absolutely,
art director-writer
absolutely.
team.
And they were inspired by German advertising. They went to the newsstand and bought German magazines,
Really?
graphic design magazines, because they
Probably more influenced by the design than the copy, I imagine.
definitely.
Because it
Basically, there was no
was son
copy.
of the Bauhaus.
Exactly. Going back to the Jewish copywriters, I have this thesis in the book that DDB sold Hitler's car by making it Jewish.
George Lois famously said we have to sell a Jewish car,
Yeah.
a Nazi car in a Jewish town.
Yeah.
And of course, yes, I suppose in a way they did it, but they didn't consciously. I don't think anybody sat there and said, "Mate, let's make this car look Jewish, or sound Jewish." It was just that was the offhand, smart way of talking, you know. There's a very interesting article years ago, which sadly I've lost, by one of our finest copywriters, a man called Tony Brigdon, who one day you should go and talk to.
Yeah, he's
very interesting.
wonderful, yeah.
Who wrote about the way the Americans wrote like that. And he said it was almost that all the immigrants came from with their languages to America. And all the languages had all these different tenses and properties and things and their grammar.
I know.
And when they got together, they invented this language and they shed all the bits that they didn't feel were important, and the spellings all changed. So through becomes, loses its complication, and tire becomes T-I-R-E, and he says it was like a verbal melting pot because of all these different influences coming together. And I think that's the language that was in New York, and that's the language that kind of got used to sell the Volkswagen.
You were talking about Youthquake, and I know you were a great mod.
Yeah.
Can you place the Volkswagen advertising a bit in the sort of the cultural revolution of the time, or the musical revolution?
The Dordain advertising appeared in America at a rather different time to the Dordain work that appeared in the UK. But oddly, they both appeared at a point of change. I think in the case of the United Kingdom that was a bit of a coincidence. But in America, as I said, this 50s thing, I mean, there's a statistic. At the beginning of the 50s, one house in America in 10 had a television set. At the end of the 50s, one house in 10 didn't have a television set. So you had that enormous thing of, seeing the world, seeing other things, windows that people didn't have before. So I think that opened people's minds. And you had this kind of youthquake, these younger people that hadn't had any wars, and so they were affluent. Then there was all the technological revolutions of washing machines, and there was all that sort of thing all going on. There was a time of tremendous change and modernisation. And of course, in the instance of the cars, they went mad. Fins and getting longer and bigger, and that's how they kind of, technology, for some reason, the car manufacturers felt they had to kind of make it visible, make things look like aircraft and things like that. It's part of this whole change. Of course, the Beetle came along and banged all that on the head and said, get back to the normal, ordinary, way of doing things. And obviously, there were a lot of people who were of a mind to do that, and that took off. So I think that was the culture that was going on there. When it happened here, when the Beetle advertising happened here, it was, the 60s were kind of almost on the way out. I mean, 69, 68, 69. But of course, the spirit of the 60s was in full swing. So it was funky, I mean, it was the Beetle, it was a funny shape, and then, of course, the 70s was when Volkswagen Works started bringing them out in bright yellow and bright orange and lime green. It was all a bit hippie culture, and so it kind of was very much of that time. And then the bus, of course, became a legendary icon. Hippies started living in them, and it all became very. But it's part of the honesty of the car in a way. I think was the attraction. That this was not a kind of, the car wasn't trying to be something else. And so if you're a bit of a hippie and you were, getting back to the earth and Mother Nature, and you had to have transport, well, a Beetle or a transporter was about.
It was a statement.
Back to nature as you could get.
It was a statement on wheels. Yeah. You began your advertising career at Volkswagen in UK.
Yes.
Did you go to Volkswagen because of the advertising? Did you notice the advertising before you went there?
I had worked initially at a company called Colt Heating and Ventilation. You won't have heard of them, but they created a very interesting industrial advertising campaign in consumer magazines. Their idea was to hijack industrialists at the weekend when they were reading the supplements, rather than try and talk to them in the trade magazines. So the ads were quite open and interesting. That's when I really first became aware of advertising and the influence it can have, not just outside on your customers, but also inside on an organisation, how it can raise people's morale and make them sort of bond together behind the advertising. If they feel the advertising is interesting and represents the company, they become proud of it. So when I went to Volkswagen, obviously I saw a similar effect in a way, that everybody related to the advertising. Initially I didn't go there because of the advertising, but it soon became one of the reasons I enjoyed being there.
Tell me about the approval process.
When I first joined the advertising department, obviously I was junior, and I would see David Abbott come in with one of the account directors, perhaps Peter Pleasance or Simon Chase. They would come in with the portfolio and go into my boss's office, and then they'd have a meeting and things, and they'd leave, and I'd run into my boss's office and say, can I have a look, what the latest ads are. And the approval process was very simple in that the client was so backed so much the agency's recommendations that there'd just be one or two words of copy that might be changed, but nearly every ad appeared just as it had been presented.
It's amazing. Obviously the work was good.
The campaign worked, the change of agency worked. Volkswagen sales, if you look back at the figures, rose year on year on year on year. Not quite as dramatically as in America, because it was a smaller market, but very dramatically. And they put the Beetle on the map, and if you look back at some of those old British ads, you will see why. Very, very interesting, very powerful, just as it had been in America.
Did you meet any of the originators of the campaign? Did you meet Levinson?
I met Bob. Bob came over a couple of times to lecture here. In fact, he gave me a copy of the Bill Bernbach book. I met John Bernbach. Bill was supposed to have come over to the launch of, remember those great Volkswagen ads, in '82, but he was taken ill not long before. So John, when he did a little speech at the launch of the book, said, my father was hoping to be here, but he's been taken ill and whatever, because Bill had kept his illness secret apart from the immediate family.
Was it leukemia?
Yes, leukemia.
Yeah, yeah.
So we had already previously, when we put the book together initially, gone over, David Abbott, myself and John O'Driscoll, and seen Bill with the manuscript, with the idea, personally, and met him and chatted, and so I met him.
What was he like?
He was very nice. I mean, he was quite humble. I mean, everybody tells stories about him not being humble, and I'm sure that's true too, but to us he was very nice. He said, "I'm so flattered you're doing this." And he was very complimentary and kind, and he was very warm towards David, because he knew David. David Abbott had worked in the Dordain office a number of years before as a young copywriter, and he knew how well David had done, of course, because David then ran Dordain in London. And you could tell Bill had a very close, almost paternal relationship, feeling towards David. There was a warmth there, that you could notice. And in fact, he insisted on taking us downstairs to the cinema and showing us some favourite commercials that he had on a reel. So it was very flattering. And he was very nice, very warm.
And how do you remember Bob Levinson?
Again, the same sort of thing, really. Quite a quiet man, but who actually had a quite interesting presentation style. He sort of very funny, like his copy, really, very, but funny in a very gentle sort of way, not comedic, really. Ironic, witty, and a very nice, charming man. Shortly before we started putting the new edition of the book together, about 18 months ago, I suppose, I wrote to Bob, and we were in sort of conversation quite a bit on it by email. And then I very sadly heard, obviously, of his death recently. And I was honoured that our trade magazine here asked me to write a few words.
The fine print. Yeah. And have you met Helmut Krohn?
No, I never did. He was in the office actually when we went there with the book, but somebody said to us, warned us off, and said, "Oh, don't go and talk to him about Volkswagen, because he doesn't want. He wants to talk about the things he's doing now. He's a bit dismissive." I think I even saw him in the corridor, but no, he wasn't really. He was very much. He got fed up with talking about it, I think, and he was doing his, Fox ads for Audi or something, or one of those other things that he went on to do. But no, I missed that meeting.
And Julian Koenig?
No, of course, Julian, I don't know what he was doing at that point. He certainly wasn't at Dordain anymore. We were young men on a budget to get the book to put to bed, and we didn't spend that many days in New York. We spent a bit of time in the archive. We had a couple of very helpful people tracking some stuff down for us, but a lot of work had been lost. I think they had some kind of fire or something at some point you might have heard of, where some work was lost. So I never really got a chance to track down any of the other members of the team.
Another thesis in the book is that the Volkswagen campaign, and Think Small in particular, the ad sort of triggered the cultural revolution. Would you agree?
Volkswagen was swimming in a direction that the tide had turned, I believe. I don't think Volkswagen advertising turned the tide. I think it...
Yeah, they sort of sensed that the tide had turned and were...
and they swam with the turn.
To associate themselves with the new tides.
But I think they kind of had to, because of the nature of the thing they were selling. Because it didn't relate to the old times, at all. You'd never...
I think it was a lucky coincidence. You couldn't sell the product in another way, and at the same time you had this sort of cultural revolution starting, and it's sort of the two matched.
Yeah. I think
the honesty which you had to use to sell the car sort of appealed to the new generation.
Yeah, and the tone of voice, slightly almost dismissive, which was very much rejecting the old values, rejecting parental values, that kind of thing. It It was against the status quo, really, wasn't it?
It was, definitely.
It does all the work all week, but on Saturday night we go to the party,
Well, but talking about this and other ads, which are your favorite ads in the book?
I guess lemon is probably my favourite ad. Actually.
Really?
Yeah. There are a couple of other favourites I have. It was the only thing to do when the mule died. 33 years later, he got the bug. I like that a lot. After we paint
You like the color ads?
Yeah, I suppose they're the ones that stick in my mind.